Hi there, Lindsay from Prairie Fire here. Just wanted to give a quick thank you on behalf of the staff and board of Prairie Fire to the Composing Winnipeg class at the University of Winnipeg for working with us on this project and for conducting the interviews. As well, a big thank you to all of the authors who took time out of their busy day to be interviewed for this project. Just to let you know, this is a video series, so we will be posting more videos as well, or have already, depending on when you're watching this. So please check our channel for additional content, and we really hope you enjoy. On with the interview.
Yeah, so I guess my first question for you was, how long have you been writing poetry?
When I was in medical school at the University of Toronto, there was a writers' circle that I joined at Hart House, which is one of the old buildings at the downtown U of T campus, and it met every Sunday. It was called Algonquin Square Table, and it was there that I really started, writing more regularly, bringing my poetry to be critiqued, reading other people's poetry, and also just getting into reading a lot more poetry myself.
You were first writing those poems when you were in university there. What were you writing about?
Studying medicine, you think not just about like the medical technical side of things, but you start to really ask and explore questions about big life questions, which I think, as cheesy as that sounds, you're around life and death and birth and illness and impact of all these things on people's lives, and you sort of reflect on that in your own life. And I think I just suddenly got, inundated with a lot more material, and it sparked a lot of feelings and thoughts. And so I think that's why the writing really took off at that point. And at the same time, I also started to recognize and understand the need to, um, I guess, take care of my own health and well-being while caring for others' health and well-being. And part of doing that was, immersing myself um, in this craft um, and studying it and engaging in it and taking it seriously, so that I felt like my life was more well-rounded, more whole.
Do you see any similarities between your work as a doctor and your work as a writer? And if so, what would they be?
There's an aspect of storytelling um, and careful listening, which is important in both roles. And the role of using all your senses as a medical doctor. So um, this sounds very strange, but diabetes mellitus was called that because back in the day, doctors used to actually taste the urine and taste sweet urine and diagnose diabetes that way. And we certainly don't do that anymore, but just the idea of using all your senses to make a diagnosis. You see a patient, you feel the patient when you examine them. Certain diseases are even associated with certain smells. And so that kind of multi-sensory experience is also part of writing and showing people through words different feelings, different sensations. So I think that aspect is common across both. Part of medicine too, it's scientific, it's precise, but at the same time, it's an art. And the more I practice medicine, the more I recognize that there is this um, flexibility in thinking, this ability to think laterally, ability to, um, even while following guidelines and procedures, to adjust things for humans, which are, they're not textbooks, they're not lab values. These are like moving parts, and so the same thing kind of applies to both poetry and the practice of medicine, I think.
you use these highly structured formats in some of your poems with, like you said, you can read them different ways. And I found when I was reading them, they would have, connected meanings, but maybe slightly different meanings when I was reading them each way. And so I was wondering, how is your writing process unique for these poems in particular?
My style of writing in general, at least for the initial part, is kind of intuitive, flowing. It just comes out as it does. But a lot of them have been around for years and have gone through multiple iterative processes and lots of edits. And so in some cases, you could recognize the current form, the form that was in the book from when you compare it to the original version. And in other cases, it's almost unrecognizable. Sometimes I don't plan to write them that way, but I've always been really interested in exploring line breaks and multiple meanings, and not just multiple meanings that are accidental, but sort of intentional multiple meanings, because I think that's a big part of the content that I'm writing about. I like that ambiguity of it can mean different things depending on how it's read. I sometimes, I've written something out, and it can be a challenge to make the poem make sense, no matter how you read it. And so that can take time. So once I've done the initial writing, sometimes I'm struggling to figure out how to, line up the vertical and horizontal readings. And I see that as almost analogous to solving an algebraic problem, right? Like making, A plus B equals C plus D. And sometimes there's a bit of playing with it that happens after the fact.
What was the source of inspiration for weaving in Hebrew and then, like you said, the Jewish, liturgical references?
The book is divided into 6 chapters, and these different chapters have quotes in the beginning of each chapter, and those are text excerpts from the Machzor, which is the special prayer book that's read at the Jewish high holidays, in particular the Day of Atonement or Yom Kippur. And I really love the language, because even though if you read some of it on its own, it seems almost barbaric and antiquated. There's references about killing a chicken instead of, dying yourself as an atonement for your sins. But at the same time, it's funny, it's strange, and it almost feels contemporary. And so I love how, although you wouldn't expect it, it seems really relevant and really poetic, for lack of a better word. English is part of how I think and talk, same with Hebrew, and same with now, like the language of medicine, which is something that I learned as an adult. So I think, first of all, there's some things, you can translate between languages, but you can't always say the exact same thing, even when you're trying to translate. So there's some meanings that I feel like are unique to each different language, and that's why I feel like it's important to use all those languages that I have at hand, even recognizing that, of course, not all my readers are going to have those languages accessible.
Do you see connections to Winnipeg in your writing?
Interestingly, my grandmother grew up in the north end of Winnipeg in the 1920s. And so I have connections to Winnipeg, although my family hasn't really lived in Winnipeg until I moved here as an adult. My grandmother grew up on Salter Street and attended St. John's High School, and growing up, she always told me stories about going to the library all the time to get books. She was a huge reader, and although her family was sort of modest means, she loved reading, and the library was like an amazing thing for her, the ability to just, despite not having a lot of money to do all the things that she wanted and not having the opportunity to go to school or after finishing high school, she was just able to read a ton. So that was, I feel like I had a connection to Winnipeg in childhood, just like hearing all her stories of cold it was. So I think the other way that being in Winnipeg plays into my writing is I sort of, to some extent, have this feeling of displacement or migration. And I'm an immigrant and come into this place. And I also have learned since coming here that I, trying to find my place and how I fit in here, and recognizing that feeling of displacement, and also knowing about the peoples who first were here, and trying to draw some parallels with feeling out of place, either in your own home or out of your own home. And so I recognize that I'm living in the homeland of a lot of First Nations peoples, that this is their ancestral homeland, and then feeling like at the same time that I at times am displaced, wondering how that displaces other people. So I think the content and the themes have, while like not directly about that, I've thought about that a lot in writing about immigration and displacement and identity. The clouds followed us down the coast, almost into ocean foam, before leaving us, an island, halfway between seawater and a cactus blooming. Brimming with imported water, we defied all odds, remembered life vests. And we also remembered stick shift, drove between dry and wet worlds through Arcosolia and Loculi, searching for permanence. Drove with all windows open, sucking in the pressure of salt, lifting wetness. Touched every tight curve, our heated wheels on burning asphalt, while earth behind us threw quips at our departure. The souvenir shops had everything: almonds and honey, postcards, the replicas of baklava for tiny churches. Calderas jutted out like overflowing breasts on busts of Greek gods, declaring independence from relentless blue. You took photos, I read out loud, Wikipedia, excerpts from Homer, names of mountains, Emily and love forever. We felt like tourists, strange to each other suddenly. Peeling burnt skin, we found a pinkness, newer than whites and blues, our mythology.